This week on Quadriga, Turkey and the IS, Erdogan's double game. Turkish forces look on as the battle for the Syrian town of Kobani rages. Kurdish fighters are struggling to resist the advance of the so-called Islamic State, even though a US-led coalition is supporting them with airstrikes. Ankara, meanwhile, seems more worried about its long-standing enemy, the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK. Fighting between the Turkish military and the PKK threatens to undermine the 18-month truce between the two sides. That can only compound the anger of Kurdish demonstrators in Turkey, dozens of whom have been killed during protests against the government's inaction in Syria. Turkey faces a difficult balancing act to reconcile its internal struggles with its role as a member of NATO. Your host this week, Ali Aslan.
Hello and welcome to a new edition of Quadriga. Well, Turkey, as we just saw, is in the hot seat. It is engaged in a very difficult and delicate balancing act. This is a very complex issue, an extremely intricate issue, one we hope to entangle throughout the next 45 minutes. And to help me do that, I am joined by three experts, all who've been following the story very closely. Welcome to Günter Seufert, who is a leading Turkey analyst with the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. Before he came to Berlin, he worked as a journalist based in Istanbul. And a very warm welcome to Daniel Gerlach, who is the editor-in-chief of Zenith, the German magazine devoted to the politics in the Middle East. He has worked on several television documentaries on the Middle East and the Islamic world. And last but not least, Bilgin Ayata, who is a political scientist and assistant professor of international relations at the Free University here in Berlin. Her research focuses in particular on Turkey and the Kurdish conflict. Günter Seufert, extremely intricate and complex issue, so let's get right to it. Turkey is being criticized for not helping the Kurds in their fight against the Islamic State in the Syrian town of Kobani. Some even questioning Turkey's commitment to NATO. Do you share that criticism?
I would share the criticism regarding the help or not help of the Kurdish fighters in Kobani, because this is a humanitarian issue and it should have priority before Turkey's struggle with the PKK, which is an outlawed party in Turkey and in Europe and also in the US, but not with the PYD, which is fighting primarily in Kobani. And I think it's too easy to equate the PKK with the PYD and also to forget the other ethnic groups which live in the northern parts of Syria and which are part of the three cantons of the established three Kurdish cantons. And therefore, it has to be the Turkey should distinguish between these two issues. On the other hand, I think we cannot criticize Turkey's role in NATO because we don't have a NATO strategy for the IS. The NATO is a defense alliance, and we have seen in Libya and also in other issues that NATO has not put forward a joint policy in many aspects.
And Daniel Gerlach, Turkey again is being criticized for not acting in northern Iraq. Now, the Turkish government as well as the Turkish people are saying, why should Turkish soldiers die? Why should we as Turkey get involved when the US, when Germany, when the EU is firmly opposed to sending ground troops to northern Iraq? So why should Turkey send any?
Well, the question here is, who asked the Turks for ground troops? Who actually wants the Turks to engage in a three-front war in Syria? Even the Kurds, even the PYD, even the PKK said, we're not interested in having Turkish troops on the ground in Kobani. This would rather cause more trouble and more problems than contribute to a solution or to relief. The question is, can the Turks establish some kind of corridor for Kobani? Can they, and that's my opinion, can they probably do the same thing they had done with IS before, which is, look away, turn a blind eye on weapons deliveries, humanitarian border crossings, all kinds of supplies and support that Kobani would need in order to stand against IS. I think that at this moment, the Turks could be inconsistent in a positive way, and this would help the situation, not sending troops to Syria. I know there is a big, talking about the strategy, about a no-fly zone, a humanitarian buffer zone, whatever. I don't think this is going to help Kobani right now.
Well, to establish a safe corridor in order to help the Kurds to supply arms and fighters to Kobani is indeed one option. But there are people, there are nations among the international community who are saying Turkey should send ground troops, should get involved. Do you think that's not hypocritical of many of these countries who are saying, well, our soldiers are certainly not going to be sent to northern Iraq?
Well, Turkey shares a border, right? I mean, it's primarily a conflict that is right now evolving at its border. So it has already, because of the Syrian conflict, over 1 million refugees in the country. And just within this 1 month, 200,000 people came from Kobani. So this is not just some external distant problem to Turkey, but if it doesn't act now, it will have this very problem on this side of the border. We have seen what happened last week in Turkey, where many Kurds went on the street and protested the politics of Turkey. And right now there's a little bit of calm in this past few days, but we don't know how long this will hold. So unless Turkey doesn't change its strategy, this right now external conflict is becoming even more an internal conflict.
And why can't the international community that is criticizing the IS, of course, is trying to fight the IS and it wants to support the Kurds, why can't it muster any kind of coalition and get involved here?
Well, right now, I mean, I think there are some interesting developments going on, right? The focus is clearly on Turkey. This is, no doubt that this is happening. I think today, Germany's Volker Kauder, the head of the Conservative Party, was suggesting that, it may be, Germany would not should not exclude the option of sending arms also to the PKK, which is an interesting development, considering the relationship between Germans and the PKK.
Which, by the way, the foreign minister has denied. He said delivering weapons to the Peshmerga in northern Iraq is a singular case. This is not going to be a case to follow with other conflicts.
Right, but as long as Turkey is not acting, people are changing and countries are changing their attitudes, right? So because of the inaction of Turkey, the focus is getting more and more, and the world is seeing that the Kurds are alone with this fight. So if Turkey is not acting, the Kurds will receive more support. So it's up to the Turkish government to decide if it's going to change its politics or not.
Well, Günter, the Turkish government is saying we want a NATO mandate and on top want Assad also to be the target. It cannot be just limited to the town of Kobani. We're forgetting the larger mission here, which is to get rid of Assad. Doesn't the Turkish government have a point?
They want a UN mandate, not a NATO mandate, a UN mandate. And they know that they will not get it. And therefore, it's an excuse, and a very cheap excuse.
Because, of course, Russia won't play along.
Yeah. What I think is more dangerous is really to ask for a no-fly zone and for a buffer zone or for a safe haven, how they call it. Because this really would oppose Russia, would oppose Iran. That means very important states who are now in a kind of tacit coalition with the US, and therefore it would weaken the international frontier against the IS, and it could even cause a kind of more tension and maybe a regional war. And therefore I think it's a very dangerous strategy which is not going to play out. But what is very interesting that today in the news was that Davutoglu specified the regions he would like to establish a kind of safe haven for refugees. And at the same time, we see very mild tones in the US towards Turkey. And it was very, I think, revealing that US President Obama talked about 3 states in the Middle East, in the region, the US has to cooperate with, and that's Jordan and Lebanon, very small actors, and Turkey. That means it looks very much like the US is going to build their strategy more on Turkey, and that means it has to come to a bargaining with Turkey and to an agreement. Well, and I very much doubt that we might have a kind of some small spots, Laskiye, Aleppo, Beki, maybe Kobani, but we'll not have a no-fly zone, but we will have a kind of bargaining and Turkey will get involved.
But who says that Turkey isn't involved at the moment? I mean, I'm not claiming this to be factual, to be the utter truth. But my observation is that the airstrikes on Kobani have taken a very interesting turn. They were very inefficient in the beginning. Then they got more efficient. Then again, you know, the Americans complained that they couldn't really hit the dynamic IS targets on the ground. And then all of a sudden, strikes have become more efficient. So what could have happened there? My observation is that the Turks have assisted the Americans in a way. And I think what they have used is the so-called joint terminal attack controllers on the ground, which are the people that laser paint dynamic targets on the ground in order to assist the bombers in the airstrikes. So the PKK doesn't have people that would cooperate in such an sensitive military environment with NATO. So I think the Turks must have sent some agents, they must have sent troops, they must have sent whatever, secret ops to Kobani in order to assist the Americans, at least to show some goodwill. I think this must be the explanation for what had happened. The Peshmerga in Iraq have this kind of cooperation with NATO, with the alliance air forces. The PKK doesn't have it.
The QID claims to have it.
Well, I think they claim, but I don't think they do. Because if you look at the very sensitive technical, preconditions of such a cooperation within NATO, the Turks can do that, the Peshmerga can do that, but I don't think that the PKK would get the launch codes, literally.
And to understand Turkish concerns over the PKK, perhaps it's important to note that about 40,000 people have died in the fight between the Turkish government and the PKK since 1984. The PKK is still labeled a terrorist organization by the United States, by Turkey, of course, but also the EU. In fact, President Erdogan went so far as to say, for us, the IS, the Islamic State, and the PKK are the same. We don't distinguish between the two.
Which is really ironic, given that Turkey is right now still officially conducting a peace process, apparently, with exactly this organization, which they right now equating with IS. So on the one hand, we see a very contradictory politics with regard to domestic politics, and so far that on the one hand, since last year, there's such a huge public discussion, and it really makes the top of the political agenda that now Turkey, for the first time, the Turkish government has instigated something that they call the solution process, or it's also called the peace process. And yet at this very same time, right now, we just had this statement, or another statement was, what has Kobani to do with Turkey? Well, if you really ignore the geographical, historical kinship relationships that happens, between these beyond the border.
But should the peace process between Turks and the Turkish Kurds, if you will, or the Kurds living in Turkey, should that really be tied to events taking place in Kobani?
It is. It is. It's not if it should, but it is. We have to look at, first of all, how this peace process came about. Some initiatives were taken already since 2009 with regard to this, but the intensification and the fact that it became now really a public agenda in Turkey has only emerged with the Syrian Kurds becoming much more powerful since 2012, when they took up Kobani, Jizre, and Afrin, right, and created autonomous Kurdish enclaves, which meant that around Turkey we have a Kurdish belt on the Syrian border, partially, and also of its border towards Iraq. So Turkey is right now really surrounded by an ever more powerful Kurdish belt. So it had to react also internally, and this is, I think, how the peace process came out at the first place. It was much more of a strategic, tactical step, which we see, which maybe explains why it is such a fragile process. Right now, it looks like everything is going to reverse, and we're going to go back to the 1990s in Turkey.
And indeed, we are seeing that Turkey's inaction in northern Iraq is having direct ramifications on its domestic front as well. The truce, the peace process that we've been alluding to throughout this discussion, is very much fragile and about to take a serious hit. Let's have a quick look.
For the past 18 months, the Turkish state and the Kurdish PKK party have observed an uneasy truce. It followed decades of armed conflict which cost tens of thousands of lives. Now, with wars raging in the region, Ankara has become nervous that Kurdish nationalism may be growing stronger.
We are still decisive in the peace process with the Kurds. We have set out our roadmap for this issue. Everyone knows that. We have also decided to take new steps in this regard, but no one should doubt our decisiveness to protect public order.
But Turkey's Kurds would like to support Kurdish fighters in Syria. Their leaders are angry that the government is preventing that.
We do not say the Turkish army should go there and fight against IS. We said there are tens of thousands of Kurdish youths who want to fight.
Clashes between Kurds and the police have led to dozens of deaths in southeastern Turkey in the past weeks. Fueled by regional conflict, tensions between Turks and Kurds have flared once again.
Well, Günter, up to 40,000 people, as we said, have died since the 80s, since the Turkish government has been fighting the organization called PKK. A truce has been established. It's been holding for about 18 months. Looks very much fragile now, doesn't it?
Yes, it looks very much fragile, but what we said before, I think we should remember that all actors in the region had to change and to readjust their position after the coming up of IS. And we see today that Turkey is very much, it's very difficult for Turkey to decide on its course, and I really think they don't have a strategy right now. They feel really pressed in the situation, but the same is true for Barzani, the same is true for Iran, the same is true for US, and maybe also for Israel. That means the coming up of the IS has put all the actors in a very difficult, in a very delicate position, and I think what we see now, that there is no strategy for a long-term fight against IS, that there is a very fragile coalition of the US and the Arabic states, that Europe is not knowing what it's to do. And the same is true in a way for Turkey. The Turkish situation is even more difficult, as you said it, and as we saw it, that it also has strong domestic repercussions. Yeah. But I forgot your question, sorry.
Well, you more or less answered it, and there'll be more, don't worry about it. Daniel Gerlach, Turkey seems to be in a really delicate catch-22 situation here. On one hand, if it does get involved, it fears that it might embolden and strengthen the PKK. If it doesn't, if it doesn't get involved, if it does get involved, it might fear repercussions from the Islamic State, perhaps retaliation on Turkish soil.
Absolutely, and Turkey is very vulnerable. When Erdogan compared the PKK to IS, and he said, like, I don't see much of a difference between these two organizations, I think it might be more revealing concerning his opinion on IS than his opinion on the PKK. And this is interesting. I think the initial sympathy that a radical Sunni movement in Syria collected from Turkey and even from the AKP electorate is very interesting and very revealing. I think there is a growing anti-Shiite sentiment in Turkey, which can no longer be ignored. And the fact that IS established this obscure Sunni Islamic State in the center of what anti-Shiite propaganda in the Middle East called the Shiite crescent, that it emerged just there. I think it's not a conspiracy theory to say that many parties in the Middle East, including a substantial part of the AKP political establishment, believe that it could be a good thing, or at least it could be less harmful to Turkey than it is to Turkey's opponents, including the PKK and the Kurds. So I think this growing anti-Shiite sentiment can no longer be ignored, even though we read very little about it, and it makes us understand the initial sympathy that even Erdogan himself, I think, had for these jihadist fighters that were, according to his Weltanschauung, on the right track because they were fighting the Assad regime.
Bilgin, sorry, but I think I'm totally disagreeing. I don't see this anti-Shiite mood in Turkey. There was a strong, for example, quarrel between the so-called Gülen community, which is more anti-Shiite, and the Erdogan government, and it was really isolated, the Gülen community. But what I see is the positive way, not the negative way from the anti-Shiite, but the positive. There was a positive vision of Turkey to establish itself as a regional actor, as a powerful state in the region. And the way to do this was first to bind Syria diplomatically and culturally and politically to Turkey with the friendship of Erdogan and Assad. And as this not worked out, Turkey totally supported the Muslim Brothers and other Sunni actors because they had been the majority. And they are close to Turkey, to the AKP in terms of Weltanschauung. And we saw the same strategy in Egypt, where Turkey very much supported also the Muslim Brotherhood. There was the endeavor to become powerful by means of having friendly Sunni-supported governments in the region. And I think this is the reason why, on the beginning of the Islamic State, there was a lot of sympathy, because these had been Sunni actors who had been, in a way, discarded by the Maliki regime in Iraq, and therefore they deserved some sympathy. And I think this sympathy comes there. I don't see this anti-Shiite
it's also
mood
not just
in
sympathy,
Turkey.
right? We should not beat around the bush. I mean, there seems to be very obvious support, active support by Turkey, and that's maybe what made this project and this ambition of becoming a regional actor so problematic. The Kurdish problem, the Kurdish conflict, is the soft belly for Turkey's ambition to become a regional actor, because it's not just a domestic issue, it's a trans-regional conflict that exists there. And that's why this peace process was so important. But right now, Turkey is again, instead of focusing more of the anti-Shiite movement or the sentiment, I think it's again trying to, make the Kurdish issue again a very big security issue. I mean, you were just referring to it as an opponent, right? They're in a peace process. How could this be an opponent, right? I mean, you're sitting now under together. The grounds are being prepared for negotiation, for political negotiation. So
and the imprisoned PKK leader Abdullah Öcalan has already said, if Kobani falls, the peace process is over.
Well, again, he called for moderation, he called for a more moderate stance.
He did, but that is very clear, the sentiment within the Kurdish population. This is why people are on the street. If Kobani falls, the peace process is over. The peace process is anyway just more or less a rhetorical process. We have not seen concretely something happening from the side of the Turkish government. Now the PKK troops withdraw to a significant part, and a lot of them went to Syria for the past 2 years and have been there setting up the infrastructure in Rojava and in Kobani, which this is why these two things are so entangled. I mean, the PKK forces that withdrew from Turkey are an important force there in Kobani, not just in Kobani, but in the entire Rojava region. So you cannot take these two things apart by saying, okay, we will keep a peace process, but we are not going to help the Kurds fighting the IS there.
But isn't President Erdogan still the Kurds' best bet within Turkey? Under him, they have enjoyed unprecedented degree of autonomy. Now, are the Kurds really willing to throw it all away?
And Kurds voted for him. This is an interesting, often ignored fact that he had a large appetite for the Kurdish electorate. And when we talk about a peace process, it was also his calculation, or the calculation of his party, that he would mobilize the Kurdish electorate. And the reason why, you have excellent healthcare services, or comparably good healthcare services in Eastern Anatolia, good streets and excellent pavement in Batman and Diyarbakir, is also probably the reason for this. The Kurds became more and more, affected to the AKP even, and this is now...
I would doubt that a little bit. I would really question that, because if you look at the municipalities that are run by the pro-Kurdish party, they are suffering very much from Ankara's efforts not to send money that they have to, and it's been really difficult to set up some of that important infrastructure. Of course, in terms of roads and housing, etc., these are centrally projects of the AKP that encompass the entire country, right? But I think it would be a little bit overstretched to say that Kurds are, of course there are also Kurds as there are from any elements voting for the AKP, but if you look at the region, you can see clearly that, control is there.
It's not a contradiction, because it's one thing to approach the Kurdish population with roads, healthcare service. And it's quite another thing to cooperate with the political representatives of a part of the Turkish coalition, of Turkish population, namely the PKK and the HDP. And these are different strategies, but they're all strategies towards the Kurds, and they're all strategies that work for a solution, in a way. In the mind of Erdogan and Davutoglu, I think they want to have an integration of the Kurdish population without a Kurdish nationalist ideology. And that is the vision, in a way.
He said in 2009, he said, like, where would Turkey be, I'm talking about Erdogan, if we hadn't lost 25 years in a stupid war. He didn't mention the PKK in particular, but he was like referring to this war. So we can see that it was even the promise of the AKP in 2002 to solve the Kurdish question.
And not much. I mean, even though it has now really come far in this term that we're even talking about a peace process, on the substance, right? If you look at the actual conditions for Kurdish political actors that identify themselves as Kurds, right? I mean, Erdogan likes always to speak of his Kurds in the party, the 75 MPs, Kurdish MPs, but we never hear of them when Kurdish issues are at stake. So, you can use Kurd as an ethnic category and as a political category, and I think this is the difference, that there is within the AKP not much obstruction or not much disliking for the ethnic term Kurd, but as a political category, it still causes a big problem.
Well, certainly the tensions are running high in Turkey these days. That is for certain, and the continued fighting in Kobani doesn't make Erdogan's job much easier. Again, though, the question we've had, and it's been mentioned by you, Turkey has taken in about 1.5 million refugees since the conflict in Syria started, up to 200,000 Kurdish people ever since the fighting in Kobani started. The international community is pointing now the finger towards Turkey, is putting Turkey in a hot seat. Still seems to be somewhat of a pretty easy and convenient solution, doesn't it, Bilgin?
Absolutely. I mean, with regard to the refugee issue, there is no doubt. I mean, look at just Europe. How many refugees does it take up from Syria, right? I mean, it's been really remarkable how we are facing one of the biggest humanitarian crises in Syria with 9 million displaced people, and there's really no significant action whatsoever. And within that, we have to say that Turkey really, with its refugee policy, opening its borders until Kobani, I mean, we have to see that there were many reports that they were also obstructing people to come in from Kobani. But for the time before, the borders have been relatively open, which meant that on the one hand, of course, refugees were coming in, but there were also, of course, all these speculations about enabling fighters of the opposition and of the ISIS to, move very easily across the borders. But Turkey's doing there a remarkable job by taking up so many people, but their situation is desolate. I mean, we just had there was an event here just a couple of weeks ago in Berlin where there were several NGO representatives talking about the situation of refugees. It's really very devastating, and the world is just looking away.
Is Turkey's mission and method of anyone but Assad? That was basically the notion that's been put forth by Turkey for a very long time. Anyone but Assad. That's why the willingness to play along with the IS. That's certainly failing now, isn't it?
Well, it's probably failing, but
backfiring.
But this was not Turkey's idea and Turkey's ideology, Turkey's approach alone. Remember the fact that when we talk about Turkish support for jihadist groups in Syria, the Turks, as you just said, also supported non-jihadist groups. They supported the Free Syrian Army. And I remember even a couple of months ago talking to a friend in Aleppo who said the Turks are the only ones who haven't let us down. Everybody else has forgotten us, but the Turks are the only ones we can still count on. So, they weren't very much, they weren't very picky with who they support. They just wanted Assad to fall. The irony is that they helped and supported a group which had anything in mind but bringing down Assad, which is IS. IS did not fight Assad. They very lately joined the fight probably against Assad, but they had other interests than fighting Assad. They wanted to establish their own power base and their own, what they call it, caliphate. But they weren't interested in attacking Assad. And this is kind of an irony of the whole story, that they have supported, that Turkey has helped create an entity, a jihadist group, which has a lot of, geopolitical interests and aspects, but not bringing down Assad. Notwithstanding, the Turks say it is pretty difficult for us to tell our people that we haven't done anything, we haven't done an intervention for 3 years, we have witnessed Assad barrel bombing Aleppo on a daily basis and killing his people. And now, after 3 years, all of a sudden they ask us to intervene against IS. And I think this is one of the reasons why not only the AKP, but also all the other parties, the MHP, the JP, everybody is kind of reluctant. The non-intervention policy of Turkey is kind of fake, but it is very popular. It has a large political, based on a large political consensus.
And the one person that seems to be forgotten throughout this, not only this discussion, but also throughout the past few weeks, if not even months, is Assad, is President Assad. He's still very much in power, perhaps holds a much firmer grip than ever on his country. Doesn't even seem to be the #1 target on the list anymore of the US.
It was very ironically that a couple of days ago it was a politician from Iran who reminded us that Israel might have no interest now in displacing Assad, given the powerful Islamic State and its ideology. But I don't think that we can say that Turkey's policy is fake. Its non-interventionist policy is a fake. If you look at the strategy of the international coalition, or what Obama said, that we have to destroy the Islamic State. And this is a very unrealistic goal. And as the coalition partners, particularly the Arab world, there is it's not clarified how they are going to deal with the balance between IS and Assad. It's a very fragile coalition. And therefore, I think the Turks are very well aware that it would make no sense at the given state of affairs to intervene really militarily and to join a coalition that does not have a reliable strategy. Because I think it's one thing to say, to accept the situation on the ground, that is, there are destroyed states and there is a large Sunni population who is building their hopes or investing their hopes into this Islamic State, and the Islamic State is restructuring society in a way, it's organized society, and it is here to stay for a couple of years or maybe even for a much longer time. And therefore we have to have a much more realistic strategy. We have to say that we have to protect people that live at the phrase of the state, and we have to maybe to protect people from genocide. But we are not able to say we are going to destroy a state that is, even if we don't like it, that is going to replace state structures. And therefore I think it's not realistic, and Turkey is very well advised first to ask for a comprehensive strategy and then to engage.
One footnote to that, when you say that the coalition wants to destroy the Islamic State and that Turkey does not agree with this approach, I think there's also a nuance in who is the enemy. Because there is another powerful jihadist group in Syria, which is called Jabhat al-Nusra. We all have heard of it. And my understanding is that the Turks do not consider Jabhat al-Nusra a legitimate target. They consider it a rightful, let's say, jihadist extremist, but partner in the fight against Assad. And the Americans don't. And the Americans have attacked, they have bombed Jabhat al-Nusra in Syria, while the Turkish head of the Turkish intelligence service, Hakan Fidan, is still negotiating with them. And this is like, counterproductive for all parties.
But from my mind, it's even more important, that notion of what you said, who is the enemy? I think it's one thing to define the enemy, and it's another thing to act internationally, even militarily, in the frame of the responsibility to protect. That means you can formulate a negative goal, who is the enemy, who I'm going to destroy, and you can formulate a positive goal that has much more legitimacy in it.
Well, certainly an extremely complex issue, and the conventional notion in international relations that my enemy's enemy is my friend certainly doesn't hold in this case. That's why. Let's get back to Turkey here for 1 second. Bilgin, what should Turkey do now? Turkey is in a very difficult spot right now. I think even President Erdogan understands and realizes that. What, according to you, in your opinion, what should Turkey do?
Well, it should Well, I mean, if there is a clarity about what Turkey's biggest threat is, it would make it easier for Turkey to act, right? And it seems that there are some conflicting views about that. Right now, it acts as the PKK or the Kurds are the biggest threat, which is wrong, plain wrong. If you look at that, I mean, everything that we were just mentioning with regard to ISIS building up a state, a new form of state structures there, the most effective force so far fighting this, not just on military ways, but also really presenting an alternative model of society, of rule and order, has been these three enclaves, where the PYD has been kind of doing a political experiment where, for instance, women have taken a very important role, minorities have been included into the local governance structures, etc. So it has been posing in this very short time, despite very difficult conditions, being in a war zone, a very interesting political experiment that has been ignored very much from the Western media, what's been going on there. So it's not just important for those autonomous enclaves, but just also as a larger model, how society, how a mode of rule and governance can be possible for the entire Middle East in that regard. I mean, women have been taking up very key roles in this. As I said, the minorities were part of the at all levels in the various decentral governance structures. So I think this is not just a battle, what is at stake is not just fighting IS, but also creating room for a different form of democratic governance in the Middle East, I would say.
Well,
just
Bilgin
as it
Ayata
is
says certainly Turkey has to make up its mind on who the enemy is, and it is, says Bilgin Ayata, the Islamic State first and foremost. Daniel, would you agree?
Well, yeah, I do agree, but I think there are more, also practical and tactical aspects to this. Günter just asked for a strategy. Everybody's always asking for a comprehensive and consistent strategy. I don't think, there is, we have time for a strategy at the moment. I think you have to be tactical, and in a way, the Turks have been tactical in very counterproductive and in very negative ways, and they can also be tactical in some positive ways.
How?
They should, for example, they're very proud of their NGOs. They're very proud of the plurality and variety of the NGOs that are active in Turkey. They say this is a sign for civil society and liberalism. There are many NGOs that are supporting jihadi fighters. There are many NGOs that spread, and I don't agree with you, Günter, that this is not an issue, that spread radical Sunnism and sectarian violence, or let's say a sectarian fanaticism. So I think the Turks have to fight on that. They have to push back this sectarian sentiment which is going on and which is kind of destroying the atmosphere. And they also want to become a member of the European Union, and they have just renewed their approach. They have just, declared a European strategy. So we should not, slander Turkey for what it does, but we should, be able to criticize what Turkey does, because Turkey is not only a NATO partner, but also a potential member of the European Union.
Günter, if you had President Erdogan's ear, what would you whisper into it?
I first would say that he should completely change his rhetoric. This is very dangerous for the development in Turkey, and we saw these clashes with the many people being left dead. Then he should, in a way, maybe read history again, because it was only 3 days ago when he talked in a way about the Middle East and about the imperialists draw the borders with the effect, not only with the effect, but also with the goal to have the different peoples in the Middle East clashing with each other. And he even accused the coalition to bomb the oil wells, not for weakening IS, but for having the control over the oil. That means he is very much in a very ideological worldview still. And I think first he should try to get out of it and to find a common ground for the people who he's talking with the US. And maybe on the last thing, I think he should realize, or I think he knows it, that the military is again powerful, or become more powerful in Turkey. I think there would be a different policy, particularly towards the PKK, maybe, if the military would not have been gained ground anymore in political issues in Turkey.
Well, the US is certainly supporting the Kurds with airstrikes so far. with mixed outcome. So we'll have to see how that campaign continues to go. Bilgin, once again, the criticism directed towards Turkey, we've tried to untangle it here throughout the show. Turkey should act then, that's according to your...
Well, I think what is very important is that Turkey really has to openly also again embrace the recognition that it had some while ago that Kurds are key actors, right? Until a couple of years ago, no one cared, no one knew, Kurds didn't matter as a regional actor in the region. But we now have Barzani coming up in a stronger, taking up more and more role in the region. In Syria, we see that, obviously here they are the best organized opposition towards the IS in so far. Right now, we're not talking about Iran anymore, right? That's a little bit off the agenda now that there are negotiations going on, etc. But again, there the Kurds are very organized, and if again some conflict in the future should emerge, we will again talk about the Kurds. So Turkey has to understand that if it does no longer want Kurds to be soft belly, it has to seek it as its not only ally, but really provide, see it as a political partner with whom it can act together. And right now, it is just only acting against Kurds, not with the Kurds. And that requires a change from the attitude where so far, Kurds did not have any political significance for Turkey. And that is history right now, as of now.
Very quick assessment. Daniel, are you optimistic on how this is all going to play out?
No, I'm not optimistic, but I don't think optimism is important here. It's just like we have to understand that we are all somehow involved in this. This is not a Turkish game. This is not a Turkish double game. This is not, Turkey's problem alone. And the more we understand about our own involvement, about the European and the international involvement in it, the more we can cooperate. But I don't think, again, we should ask for comprehensive international strategies because we will never find them.
This is not Turkey's problem alone, says Daniel Gerlach, and we hope that we have shed some light on an issue that has extremely many layers. I think that was made abundantly clear on today's show. Thank you very much for the insight provided by my three guests. Hopefully you out there see through this issue now a bit more clearer. Thank you out there for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you again next week for a new edition of Quadriga.